Well, I think we've come to the point where Latinos have become a permanent element of the political landscape of the country. Anybody running for president understands they need a Latino strategy. It may not appear that way for some of the people who are running for president as candidates in their primaries, but just wait till November, and until we get there, whomever the Republican candidate is and the president will be campaigning among Latinos. And if they don't, they do so at their own risk. In some ways, Latinos are just like everybody else because they care about everything the rest of America cares about. They're concerned about the economy, the state of education, access to health care. They have relatives fighting in wars overseas. They want them home. They want to make sure they have safe schools and safe communities for their children. That's what everybody wants. They want to buy a home. They want to live the American dream. But the challenges they face to get there are often very different than challenges that other Americans face. So how you talk about these issues to Latinos is important because it's different. For example, education. Latinos are much younger than non-Latinos, so they're much more affected by the quality of public education in this country than non-Hispanic whites. That's an example. I think one of the mistakes that candidates make is that, okay, if I just do an ad in Spanish, I'm done. Well, if you do a Spanish language strategy, that's smart because the Latino citizens who consume Spanish language media, more likely than not, they're naturalized citizens, they're super voters. A Latino who comes to this country, becomes a citizen, does so because they want to vote. So if you have a Spanish language strategy, you're reaching this segment of the electorate, that's a good strategy. But don't forget the 2/3 of Latinos who are listening to English language media. You need to speak to them as well. I think it depends on the election, and we've seen that here in Texas and as well as in other states around the country. Generally, Latinos tend to register as Democrats than Republicans, and generally they tend to vote more for a Democrat than a Republican, although there are exceptions. In the city of Houston several years ago when Orlando Sanchez, a Republican, ran for mayor, he carried the majority of the Hispanic vote. So it really depends on the dynamics, the campaign, the candidate. So in 2008, 9.7 million Latinos voted, a historic number, largest ever. In 2012, we at NALEO project that 12.2 million Latinos will vote. Again, it'll be a historic number. And I do believe that Latinos will be responsible for whomever gets elected president in the United States. Because certain key states, swing states, will depend on whether Latinos turn out and how they vote, just like they did in 2008. But we also know that while 12.2 million Latinos are projected to vote, there are 21.3 who are eligible to vote and can vote come November 2012. So we can't rest on our laurels, and we're doing everything we can to figure out how do we get these 9 million Latinos who are just going to stay home in November engaged in the process. And I think what's happened with this segment of our community is that they have completely separated themselves out from politics in this country. I call them the great unengaged. They don't believe the political system can work for them. They've developed a sense of cynicism that candidates come, campaign, make promises, and don't deliver. And so I think one of the things we have to do is that we have to stop lying to people. We have to stop telling people that your life will change with this one election or this one candidate. It's not going to. Your life will change if you participate year in and year out. Well, I think the inability for the president and the Congress, when he had the majority, to get comprehensive immigration reform passed is going to be a major challenge for the president to explain that to the Latino electorate. He was very adamant about making that a promise in the campaign. He, to my face, in Washington, D.C. in 2008, when he appeared at our conference, when we asked him, will you come back next year if you're elected president and speak to the NALEO conference? He said, not only will I come back next year as president, I will come back having signed comprehensive immigration reform into law. So he has some explaining to do. Obviously, he's trying to explain to people he can't do it alone. He needs a Congress to go along. He had a Congress, but we know he used that political capital that he had after first being elected to get healthcare reform passed. And then he lost the majority of Congress. And now he can't have a Congress that works with him. So he needs to explain that. But the other thing also is, don't assume that immigration is the only issue Latino voters are going to be concerned with. In fact, it's probably not the most important issue because if you're a voter, You're a citizen, so you're either born here or you're naturalized, so you don't have a personal immigration issue to be resolved. You may have people in your family or people you know who are affected by the lack of immigration reform. I think what matters more is how the issue is debated by candidates. And I think this is where many of the Republican candidates right now are running a serious risk. And what turns people out is that when they're angry and that when they're fearful. And that's really unfortunate, but that's part, I think, of the human spirit. When you've seen people mobilize and get engaged, it's usually because they're really angry about something. Look at the Occupy movement, people were angry. The Tea Party movement, people were angry. But as far as issues that matter to people, and to Latinos in particular, I think it's the economy. Latinos have suffered the most from the foreclosure crisis. They suffered the most from the unemployment rates. They suffered the most from job losses in the United States. They suffered the most from the fallout of the housing market and construction jobs. So there are a lot of people who are really hurting. Voting is a cherished right in this country. It's guaranteed to us by the Constitution. To put any kind of restrictions on it or requirements in order for you to exercise your most fundamental right as a U.S. citizen, I think is wrong. We also know that there are hundreds of thousands of people in this country who simply do not carry the kinds of IDs that are being required by many states. So in essence, it's another literacy test. It's another tax on voting. And we've been lamenting here about how people don't vote and how people don't care. If we add one more layer, it really is a strategy to suppress the vote. There should be no fraud in voting. We completely agree there. Show us the evidence that there's rampant fraud, that we need these kinds of laws. It simply doesn't exist.